Welcome to Get Real. We're so excited you're joining us today for another engaging conversation with independent financial advisors and the industry leaders who support them. Joining us today is John O'Connell, our fave, and actually our very first guest here on Get Real. We've come a long way, John. John is the CEO and founder of the Oasis Group, and also author of Rise of the Activist Investor, which we'll be talking about today. John, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back.
Welcome. I think it's part 3.
It's part 3. I was at a business roundtable with you as well. Yes.
We're gonna start keeping track of and give awards for most frequented guests.
Then
like
I need
they
to
do from SNL.
I need to retain the lead. I want the jacket.
We'll give you a punch card, just so you know, every time you come in. But thank you so much. It's always great to talk with you, but of course to have you here on Get Real, and we're so excited to talk about your book.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So you've been in financial services, involved in the industry for so many years. We won't go into how many, but you work with folks to help them identify value proposition. Based on what you were doing, what inspired you to write this book?
So we work, as you know, we work with a ton of independent advisors. We work with a ton of large RIAs, and we've been doing a lot of work with broker-dealers. And when you start getting into some of these larger firms, a lot of them have, for example, separately managed accounts, SMA accounts. And I started to really consider what we saw with the meme stock explosion, what we've seen now with, the race to zero. So trading fees are zero. People have access to the financial markets like they've never had access before. So, and when you look at that, and I have 3 daughters of my own who are all in their 20s at this point. When you take a look at the social movement that a lot of these young investors have gone through, and quite frankly, this polarization you see today between different value sets in our country, what does that mean for investing? And then what does it mean for the financial advisors that provide that investment to people? And that's really the reason I wrote the book. It's a labor of love. It took me 14 months to write it.
Wow.
And it's been kicking around in my head now for about 5 years.
Wow. And it has a lot of great information, and we'll get into who the book is geared toward. But I think you make a very important point in that if I'm just whoever and I don't know anything about the industry, how do I know if I can make an impact?
Yes.
I'm just a person who consumes products, right? I don't have any power, but you dispel those myths.
We do in the book. If you take a look, regardless of what you think about today's political system, companies are run by a democracy, right? So if you own a common share of stock in a company, you have 1 vote at the board of directors meeting. Now they're called proxy votes because people don't travel to board of directors meetings anymore.
Right.
But you get 1 vote. And if you get a set of like-minded people, you have the ability to nominate people for the board of directors. And if you can nominate someone for the board of directors, then the board of directors has the hiring and firing capability for a CEO.
That's right.
So the board of directors really does set the direction of the company. The CEO, the chief executive officer, executes the will of the shareholders and the board of directors. So and right now with access to the markets, you can make a change for an unbelievably low amount of investment.
That value investing and that power that the individual has. Go in a little deeper for our audience, because it is a very powerful position that an investor to any organization, any one of the top 100 Fortune 500 organizations, those investors have a lot of power.
They do have a lot of power. If you take a look, for example, and we go through a lot of examples of this in the book, but if you take a look as an example, Starbucks CEO there was a new pay package up for vote for the Starbucks CEO, and a group of investors got together and vetoed that down, and that was not passed. When you take a look at Procter & Gamble is a great example. Procter & Gamble, we all know that from the cereal that we eat and a lot of the consumer products that we have. A large portion of the Procter & Gamble outstanding stock is held by ex-employees. So they were the target of another hedge fund group that was advertising themselves as an activist investor group that targeted Procter & Gamble to be able to come into Procter & Gamble and essentially break the company up and sell the other pieces of the company off. And what you found was the ex-employees got together on Facebook groups and were able to band together and vote down the breakup plan, which caused the hedge fund at that point to really come to the table and have a conversation about really what the future of the company should be, as opposed to just breaking the company up.
Interesting.
You have an example of that, but you're using GameStop in your book with those short selling type of hedge funds, which, right, people don't recognize that this kind of stuff is happening to companies that they love, that they've worked for, they've invested themselves into it.
And what you find today, if you look at the private equity market today, you find a lot of private equity firms are finding stock that they feel is undervalued in the market or that has a large amount of short selling position. And that's where private equity is making a lot of investments today to bring those companies private because they feel that several of those companies are undervalued in the market. So a private equity firm can come in and do that. When you think about the activist investor, you know, we covered GameStop in the book because I think that was a very interesting issue to occur, primarily because of the short selling position. Another example we cover in the book that I think is really illustrative is take a look at AMC. So AMC as a company, quite frankly, if you looked at their balance sheet, they should not exist anymore. All right, but what happened is activist investors began buying AMC stock. That was driven primarily by an activist investor's individual love of the company.
Yeah.
They looked at that company and said, well, the only movie theater I have in my town is an AMC. The closest movie theater I have is an AMC. I met my significant other, my partner, at an AMC.
It's almost like in back when they would issue actual certificates, right? You hold that so closely to you. It's like, I literally own a piece of this company.
Absolutely.
And this is important to me. I want to just read a quote from your book because I think this levels the playing field for anybody who's watching the show, no matter what your background, your age, whatever. But it's about the activist investor beliefs. And you say, despite their differences, activist investors across the spectrum, from retail to institutional investors, leverage their influence as shareholders to create change in the companies they invest in. That's such a powerful thing because your book is geared toward very young audience. Technically, the millennial.
It's geared towards a younger investor, so the book actually does follow a narrative. So the book is broken out so that the first portion of every chapter is a narrative following Eileen, a young nurse who learns about activist investing from her friends, and then ultimately launches a shareholder vote because of some things that have happened with her friend group. One of her friends was passed up for a promotion, and that really causes them to go down this path. So the first portion of each chapter is really following Eileen's narrative and learning as she learns about activist investing. And then the second portion of the book covers a lot of the history behind that and how do you do this? How do you find like-minded investors that you can group together to really drive the change that you'd like to see in companies?
And you've created an arc. You go through this in detail. I don't know if we can throw this up on the screen, but just a visual quickly for folks that are watching.
Yes.
And talk to us about the arc.
We did. I invented this activist investor arc. And what the activist investor arc really does is it helps to map where an activist investor lives on this arc. And that changes over time, right? So what you'll find when you're first starting your family or first starting your career, you may be a passive activist. In which case, you may invest, for example, into ESG funds, right, or socially responsible investing funds, ESG being environmentally, social, and governance.
Right.
So, for example, maybe you don't like guns or tobacco, and you want to not invest in those particular companies. You can find an ETF, an electronically traded fund, that's ESG related and has what's called no sin stocks, which would be a lot of those items are in it. And then the next portion of the arc really runs through a casual activist. So that's an activist investor who may be moving into, for example, direct indexing. And they want to be able to own portions of specific companies in a direct index. That's where you're seeing this explosion today in separately managed accounts through the financial planning industry. After you get through that portion of the arc, you really start getting into more of the activist investor, right? So that next step of the arc, you could, for example, you could be looking at someone that's going to become more of a passive activist, right, or a beginner activist. And a beginner activist, you're going to invest in very specific companies for the sole purpose of being able to vote. So your voting activist then becomes a a beginner activist.
And there's been a lot of movement in the market with state pension funds.
Correct.
Today. I don't want this, we don't want this in our state, we're withdrawing our funds. That's a significant shift for those money managers, a shock to their system.
That's right.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really
That's control.
That's control, and that's beginning to really what we're seeing in the marketplace now is this rise of the activist investor, right? Where you have companies, for example, that are because of the company's belief may or may not fare well with the politics of the area that they're
right.
operating in. Think of Disney as a great example of that. You know, what you're finding is people are beginning to practice activist investing, and they want their voice to be heard. What the book does is it really helps them to walk through, how do I get there? You know, how do I tap into that power as a shareholder? And then for financial advisors, this is a wake-up call. Asset managers, as you pointed out, this is certainly a wake-up call for asset managers at the moment. And I think when you're, with the movement that you're seeing in the direct indexing space and the SMA space, what you're seeing now with SRI and ESG funds coming out, people want more than just an ESG fund.
Right.
And that's why you're seeing the rise of these other investment strategies. And quite frankly, the cost of maintaining these investment strategies have come down significantly. So you can cater and create a very personalized investment strategy for what would be called a Main Street millionaire today.
Right. Well, and I think part of the good that's happened is people are becoming more aware of the nuances of the industry in general, right? 20 years ago, you didn't have just Joe Schmo, you know, John O'Connell, who's never understood a mutual fund
You're
or
now
a
Joe
stock.
Schmo.
Joe Schmo, right? I don't know what this is. I'm trusting
No.
that the people that I'm investing my money
Correct.
with, they're putting me in the right direction. But now that folks are
Consumers.
educated,
Right.
there's an uptick in financial literacy, which I love and think is fantastic. It truly is a more democratic process because you're giving them the control, the power for them to steer in the direction they want to go, and not just this is what's available to you.
Absolutely, and people want that control,
That's
right?
right.
If you see what's happening today in the industry, they want to be able to have those investments reflect their value set. And in the book, we cover how do you figure out what your value set is, right? If you're not quite sure, there are behavioral tests that you can take to really understand what your value set is beyond what you find today, right? The risk tolerance questionnaire will evaluate your risk, but look at the rise in behavioral finance. What are we trying to understand when we're looking at behavioral finance? We're trying to understand that individual investor's needs and wants and how they want their money to reflect their value set. And that's really the crux of the book.
We had a very interesting guest who really stated something I think that was so fantastic. Your risk tolerance is different than what you're willing to risk.
That is correct.
Right?
That's correct. Your risk tolerance is, and I also think risk tolerance is a point of time, right? It's a measurement at a very specific point of time. You know, you're one family member accident away from your risk tolerance changing pretty significantly.
Correct. That's
right.
Like overnight.
Correct.
So I think risk tolerance is great, and I think it is a good bellwether to understand what the investor is willing to put to risk at some point. But I think a lot of the RTQs that we see in the marketplace today don't really capture the underlying goals, wants, objectives, dreams, and nightmares of the individual client. And I think that you're seeing now this, you know, again, this big rise in behavioral finance now is being driven by that, by our industry understanding. We don't really understand the investors as much as we would like to. And that's what generates the longevity in the investor, right? I mean, investors will leave if they don't feel like you're listening to them.
Go ahead. I was going to say, especially with the millennial investors, we talk about this all the time. This is a segment of people, and on the youngest part of the spectrum, 28-ish, to the higher one, which is 41, right? I'm somewhere in that spectrum. This is a group of people that they don't want you to tell them what to do.
No.
They want to say, show me, teach me, I'll help guide you on what decision is maybe best for me. We're going to take a quick break.
Excellent.
Stick with us as we continue the conversation with John O'Connell and as we talk about Rise of the Activist Investor, John's new book. Stay with us.
Aloha! Joe Silva here with Kukua Technologies, I'm excited to see you on Tuesdays on Morning Coffee for our tech tips.
Let's face it, lawyers get a bad rap. I'm Erin Brucey, host of Legal Breakdown, where we dissect legal topics for the everyday viewer, with a mix of interesting guests to talk about current events and hot legal topics. Let's work together to make the law accessible and relevant to everyone. Catch us every week on RVN Television.
A stroke can be easy to detect. A loved one can't speak, perhaps they can't move. But there's another sign of a stroke that many of us can't see. It's called spatial neglect, and it can occur during or after a stroke, causing distorted visual movements. Fortunately, there's a solution by using optical prism technology during rehabilitation. If you or a loved one have experienced a stroke, ask your doctor about spatial neglect. Spatial neglect. See the whole picture at KesslerFoundation.org.
Welcome back to Get Real. Joining us today is John O'Connell. John, we've talked about so much stuff. I'm so excited. I've already read the book, but I feel like I want to read it again.
Yep.
Because you go back a second time,
do.
you're like, oh, I got
Another
that little
tidbit of
detail.
information you missed.
Thank you.
Given that this book is really, it's written for anybody, but certainly the younger demographic, a young person picking up this book, let's say they're in high school, they're in college, how can they understand, what are the nuances that they need to understand if they're watching today's show even, that they too can be an activist investor? How can they participate?
So, you think about the technology that's available to people today, right? The rise of social media across a variety of platforms has really enabled people to come together and have these kinds of discussions. In the book, we cover Discord, which is that's a very popular communication capability. We primarily used in the gamer industry, and one of the reasons you see that I leverage Discord is if you're looking at this rise of the metaverse and what's happening with that, there's a lot of chatter about that on Discord servers.
Yeah.
But the ability for you to bring together a variety of people who want to invest in a specific company and want to see change in a company is literally at your fingertips at very little to no cost whatsoever. So the communication capability for younger investors to come together at this point is incredible. When you think of a lot of the social movements that have happened in the past couple of years, right? Think of like an Occupy Wall Street, the Black Lives Matter, some of the marches that you've seen on Washington. No one got on television and described that that's what was happening that day. That was passed by word of mouth on social media.
Right.
And you can imagine, you can see the crowds that are generated by that. Imagine if you turned around and said, I would like to have a couple of people who want to change a company and change the direction of where a company's going. Maybe in my community, I can bring my community together. So the social media capabilities are at your fingertips. The ability to actively buy those stocks is literally on your phone at this point. So banding together, buying a variety of investments that you believe in and want to see change in it's never been easier than it is today.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that with younger people within the ESG space.
Absolutely.
They are paying attention to companies and organizations that don't align with their values.
Yep.
And they're standing up and they're saying, I don't care for that. And they're getting on TikTok. So talk about that further with the ESG space now.
If you see the rise of what you, you can look at a variety of examples around that, right? You've got some people that will follow Elon Musk on Twitter as he says stonks to the moon or not. Why would people buy a stock because the owner of another company said it's going to go to the moon? They have followers, and these followers are generating this kind of response in a lot of the markets. One could argue one way or another about whether or not you believe what you're seeing on FinTok, which is the financial TikTok, or whether or not you should be taking that advice. The reality of it is, if you're not paying attention to that, then I think you're doing yourself a disservice and the industry a disservice. Because people are going to FinTok because they're not finding the advice, or they're not finding the advice in the language of value that they want to hear someplace else. So they're going to these other outlets to find that advice.
I think you bring up a very important point. We saw this happen with all types of cryptocurrency, right? Something becomes a fad, it's cool, I'm now a billionaire because I have this. I think that's also, a cautionary tale to say to young people, look, yes, educate yourself, yes, know what the conversations are, but don't jump into it without being educated enough. Have some ballast to your conversations. See what, maybe your parents or your aunt and uncles or older, individuals that maybe have a little bit more experience than you, see what they're saying about it. Let that sort of help guide you. But I do think that social media is so powerful, and influencers have so much control and power. They can sway things, and sometimes that's not always
It's good and bad.
Your best interest.
It's good
right.
and bad. And I'm going to ask you how your book is helpful to the advisor in helping their clients understand all of this that's going on.
Absolutely. So there's actually, and if you look at the activist investor arc, before you become a professional activist, you're an influencer activist, where you are leveraging your influence to shape the direction of a firm or a company, right? I think if you're a financial advisor, with everything that's happening in the industry today, with these rises of these different investment strategies, right, SMA accounts, ESG, SRI, direct indexing, if you're not sure what these mean to your practice, or you're questioning, how do I relate to younger investors? We have an aging population right now in the financial advisor community. We have an aging population right now in the assets that are held at financial advisory firms. And with the great wealth transfer, those assets are going to transfer.
They are.
And they're going to transfer to younger people. And if you're not aware of the movements, the social movements that these young people have lived through, and what that means to them, and how they want their money to really reflect their values, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. So I would hope that they would read my book to understand where are some of the investors on this arc, and really begin to open up a conversation with the heirs of their clients to understand, what do they feel like, where do they fit on the arc, right? What do their values look like to me? Because that will help you to serve those clients significantly better moving forward.
Yeah.
We just had a conversation with Vered Frank of Seeds, Director of Marketing, about this very topic.
Yeah.
And millennials are getting the money, ready or not. And if
Well, they have money too.
They do.
That's an interesting position
yes.
to not only have this huge amount, 30 trillion, to be
Right.
inheriting 9.38 billion that they currently have of their own.
That's correct.
It's huge. It's massive.
and ready or not,
Right.
they're going to be the client.
Right.
And so you better figure out how they want to be a client and how you can serve them.
Yeah.
If you take a look at the direction that millennial investors are going in, millennial investors save more than all of the other investor groups. But many studies show that. So you've got younger people who are moving into an economy right now where there are good jobs, there's low unemployment, they do have the ability to generate income, and they're saving more than other generations. And then they're going to get this, some would say, windfall of inheritance money that's going to be coming down to them. You need to understand how to work with those investors, and I hope the book can help people do that.
We have run out of time.
As we normally
You'll
do
have to
when we
come
get to
back
chat.
Early too.
for part 4.
Part 4.
You'll get your punch
I
card
want the
before
jacket.
you leave.
Thank you so much, John, for
Thank
being
you very
our
much.
guest and sharing Rise Activist Investor book with our audience. We hope that you've enjoyed our conversation today with John O'Connell from the Oasis Group. There's lots of great information in the book. We encourage everybody to pick up a copy. Until next time, be well.